My mom requested a hooded scarf for Mother's Day, so Mom, stop watching. At least wait until the package has made its way to you. She sent me an inspiration photo that's actually a hand knitting pattern, but it's not one that's going to translate well to machine knitting. So I'm going to take the basic shape and style and translate it to something that will knit better on the knitting machine. I finally actually did what I said I was going to do, and I shopped from my stash for this project. My mom wears a lot of blues and greens and wants this to be fairly lightweight, so I chose this FOMO fuzzy. It's meant to be like a mohair replacement, but it's synthetic. It's a line brand yarn that has been discontinued, but I should have enough of it for this project. So it's time to swatch. So I have my swatches. This is a plain old stockinette for gauge for the hood, and then this is fisherman's rib for the scarf part. And I will show you how to do that when we get to this. So this is going to be a hooded scarf, and I'm going to walk you through the hood part first. So I'm going to cast on some number of stitches and knit a few rows of ribbing. And then I'm going to shape the hood with short rows. So I'm going to short row in. And then I want to do that like Y thing that you see on commercial socks. So that means short rowing out a little bit and then back into the same point and then back out. And this will just make the hood a little bit deeper at this point. And these are supposed to be the same length. Like that's supposed to be more like that. I'm not good at drawing. So this is like the back of your head here, and then this will be down by the scarf part, and this is the front here. And the only measurement we actually need for this is this distance. It's gonna be if you like drape a tape measure over your head and let it reach either shoulder, that'll be this distance. And I'm not adding any ease to that because the scarf part attached to the bottom of the hood is going to add a little bit of bulk there. So this is... And for that, I'm going to need the gauge of my plain old stockinette swatch, so let's figure that out. And actually I only need the number of stitches per inch and not the number of rows, because the rest of it's going to fall out of this. So that's about 6 stitches per inch. So this distance here, I already got measurements from my mom, and this is going to be 24 inches, and that is about what I get when I measure myself, so that probably is fairly standard on most people. And then 6 stitches per inch times 24 is math that I cannot do. 144 stitches. Okay, that's it. Let's call this, I don't know, 20 rows. And that's just a guess. I don't know how long that's actually going to be because I didn't get the number of rows per inch for my swatch. And then this distance here is going to be 1/3 of the way in, so 144 over 3, that's 48 stitches. And then we'll just call this like, so that's 48, let's call this like, I don't know, 8 stitches, 10 stitches? I'm going to cast on 144 stitches, knit 20 rows of ribbing, and then short row in 48 stitches, short row out 10, short row back in 10, and then short row all the way back out until I get to the full width again. And then I'm going to leave these as live stitches to join them to the scarf part later. And I'm not going to bother to get a gauge from this swatch because what I'm just going to do is, so I will knit the hood first because this part I absolutely have to finish. And then I'm just going to keep knitting scarf until I run out of yarn because I only have like 2.5 skeins of this left, and I suspect that'll make a decent sized scarf. And then I'm just going to attach the bottom edge of the hood to the side, to the middle part of the scarf, and that'll be it. Okay, let's get this started. I'm casting onto waste yarn. The first row is normal knitting at tension 0, and then 2 rows of circular knitting at tension 1. Then onto my main tension, and I keep going. When I'm done with the ribbing, I'm transferring all the stitches to the main bed. Then dropping down the ribber to keep knitting plain old stockinette. The short rows start right away. Bring one needle into hold on the opposite side of the carriage, knit one row, wrap the last needle, and repeat. Wrap, hold, knit. Wrap, hold, knit. And then when I get a third of the way in, I start going back out for the Y shape. And then back in again. Wrap, hold, knit. And then back out again. And I got off somewhere here, but that's fine. Then I'm cutting my main yarn so I can take this whole thing off on waste yarn. And there's my hood. And I'm taking off the waste yarn because the camera's already set up. Now onto the scarf part. This is going to be fisherman's rib, but the cast on is the same as for 1x1 ribbing. 2 rows of circular knitting. Then to my main tension and tuck on one bed in one direction and on the other bed in the other direction. And then we knit. This is a little more difficult than it should be, so I'm going to go slow for the first few rows and make sure everything is knitting the way it should be. The top bed is dropping a few stitches, so I'm going to manually fix those. And you can't see because my head's in the way. And then we have a jam. It should not sound like that. And now the carriage is stuck. But it's really hard to recover in the middle of a row, so I'm going to try to finish this one. Luckily, I didn't drop any stitches or break any needles, but I can't keep going like this. So I'm going to take off the rubber carriage to figure out what's going on. Using a tool, I'm moving all of the latches and levers to see if any of them are stuck. That one's a little stiff. Then I'm tracing the path of a needle to see if I can learn more. Yeah, it's that lever. I'm going to apply a little knitting machine oil and then work that lever back and forth a little to work it in. It's moving much more freely. That is a lot better. Then it's just rows and rows of fisherman's rib. At the end, I'm canceling the tuck buttons and knitting one last row of plain knitting to make the bind off easier. Then I leave a long tail to take the whole thing off on waste yarn. Here we go. And off comes the waist yarn from the cast on edge. Then I'm finishing the cast off edge with a Kitchener stitch. There we go. Okay, so I have the scarf part knit, and I have the hood part knit, and now the proportions are a little off. And I'm trying to decide what I want to do. So this is the hood, and it is a little too deep. I guess I didn't really need to do the Y thing at the back. And then the scarf is a little short because I was short on yarn. I think I'm not going to go through and redo it because I'm pretty happy with what I've got. But I am probably going to gather up the back of the hood as I attach it to the scarf. That way, like, there's not as much volume in the back and it might fit a little bit better. And the scarf is a little short to begin with anyway, but we'll see. And this is not washed and blocked yet, so it's not in its final form. The hood should shrink up a little bit, but the scarf is probably about at its final state. Yeah, because, like, you're not going to wrap this around your head. You're just going to, like, wrap it around like a scarf thing. Okay, time to figure out my linker. Okay, so my test went well. The fuzzy yarn didn't have any trouble in the linker, and I was able to connect my two sample pieces together, so this is going to be fine. And now I'm going to do what I always tell y'all not to do, and wing it. So, I have marked the center point of my scarf, and I'm going to put this on the linker, and then I'm just going to double up the loops of the live edge of the hood along there, starting at the center point and working my way out. And then I'm going to link through and I'm going to see how it looks, because I'm going to leave the waist yarn on this until the very end so that if it's not right, I can just unravel it and try something else. So let's do this. And I'm doing this like a sewing machine, like the seam that you'd make on a sewing machine, and putting the right sides together. So that's the middle point there. And let me, come on. I need a tool. I need a tool. I don't know if this is gonna work. So there's my stretched out center stitch. This is gonna get interesting. Oh no, this is harder than it looks. You know what? I'm just gonna do this on the machine. It'll be easier. I'm rehanging the live stitches on the machine, doubling them up to gather them down a bit. Then I'm hanging the scarf part on top. There isn't an easy mapping from scarf stitches to hood stitches, so I'm just choosing a midpoint and grabbing an edge stitch. And then choosing a midpoint. And then choosing another midpoint. And on until all the needles are full. Then this is my standard gate peg bind off. Here we go, hooded scarf thing. It's assembled. This is not right. This is not salvageable in this state. This is the depths of the hood. This is ridiculous. I need to think about what I'm gonna do about this, because this is not not salvageable. Even after it gets washed and blocked, it's probably still not going to be right. So I need to think about what I actually want to do. Maybe without the Y part it would be better. I mean, a little bit. I gotta think about it. It's not right. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with the hood because it's clearly not right. Like, the scarf is too short. That's fixable. I just need more yarn and a different kind of yarn. But the hood is not right, and it's not behaving the way that I expected it to. So the first thing I did was I pinned out this extra Y part that I did here to see how it fit, and it's still way too big, so it's not just this. And I wonder if this is all just me overreacting to something that's not been blocked yet. This is fairly finished. I could wash it in this state and see how it turns out. It's probably still not going to be right, but I could still, I don't know, try it and think through my other options. Because it clearly doesn't need the Y part at the back. It's fine without that, and this is way too deep. Okay, I'm gonna wash this and see how it goes. I'm gonna finish it enough first that it's not gonna unravel, and then I'll wash it and see how it goes. This is what we started with. This is the scarfy hooded thing that I made with the first plans for the first prototype. It is wrong. It is really not right. And while I was thinking about how to make this better, I made a prototype. Off camera, of course, because everything is easier off camera. And this is more what I'm looking for. The hood is still pretty big and deep, but it is not as big and as deep as the previous version. And I didn't try to gather it down this time. I just let it be whatever it was going to be. Here is the previous version. The Y adds a lot more length to the distance of the hood than I thought it would. So I'm just gonna go with like the one row of short rows like this and not do the Y thing. And for this one, I tried a different way of doing short rows. These are what are called auto wrap short rows, and I'll show you how those work when we get to the next version of this. But it's a faster way to do short rows because there are so many of them on this project. I don't like the final look as much, but it's good enough. So we are throwing away this plan. Goodbye. And I know from experience that this yarn is not going to unravel well, so I'm not going to try to frog this because it'll probably just be a mess. The fuzzy yarn rarely will unravel well. So I got some new yarn from my stash and made some tension swatches, and we're going to work with this. This is the same fisherman's rib that I used on the other one. So the new version is just going to be... We're going to cast on, do an inch of 1x1 ribbing, and then short row in, and short row back out, and then leave these stitches live to be connected to the scarf part later. And this distance is still 24 inches. And the gauge that I got with this, hold on, let me find my gauge thingy. So, we get 8 stitches per inch. So 24 inches at 8 stitches per inch is going to be almost the full bed. So we'll just call this 200 stitches. And then this is still going in by 1/3 of the whole thing. So 1/3 of 200 is 66. And then I think I'm going to actually measure for the scarf part because before I just ran out of yarn. But I have a lot more of this color, so I'm going to actually measure. The average women's scarf is 5 inches wide. Actually, let me just... So, scarf. This distance here is 5 inches, and this distance here is going to be 60 inches. For fisherman's rib, each row is 2 passes of the carriage, and I want to know how many passes of the carriage, because that's what my row counter counts. So let's get the gauge for this. So that's going to be 17 rows per inch. And then, what is this? What is this? Oh my god, counting is hard. about 5 stitches per inch. So 5 times 5 is 25. Oh my god, counting is hard. We're just gonna call this 20 stitches. And then for 60 inches, it's gonna be 1,020, but let's just call it 1,000. That's when my row counter will roll over. So I'm gonna cast on, no, this is 40 stitches. To cast on 40 stitches, what am I doing? Yes, I'm going to cast on 40 stitches and then I'm going to knit 1,000 rows, but I'm going to stop in the middle and leave a yarn marker so I know where the middle of this scarf is, because the whole end of the hood part doesn't fit on my linker. There aren't enough needly things, so I need to find the midpoint of that as well, and then I will like put the first half of it on the linker and then start at the midpoint of the scarf and just like go from there out, and then link a bunch of it and then go from there out on the other side and hang out all of that. So that's the plan. This should work this time. The hood is pretty much the same. Starting with 1x1 ribbing. Then transferring all the stitches to the main bed. And my camera stand is still in the way. For auto-wrapped short rows, bring a needle into hold on the same side as the carriage. Then it will get automatically wrapped as you knit. The hardest part of short rows is always managing the weights. These short rows go a lot faster. And then I'm short rowing back out. And I got off again. I just can't count. I'm leaving a yarn marker at the center of the piece for assembly later. Then it all comes off on waist yarn. And we have a hood. The scarf is still fisherman's rib. Tuck on one bed in one direction and on the other in the other direction. And some of my needles are not cooperating, so I'm manually fixing the stitches that didn't tuck. And I dropped a stitch on the end here, so I'm dropping down just the side of the bed a little bit so I can fish out the stitch. And then I'm going to rehang and re-knit that stitch. This probably happened because I didn't have enough weight on the edge here, so I'm adding more now. I got to this point where a lot of the needles on the top bed weren't tucking because the latches didn't open. They probably need to be replaced, but I was already pretty deep into the scarf and I didn't want to start over, so I just manually opened the needles with this letter opener tool every row. I'm canceling the tuck buttons for the last row. Leaving a long tail. And taking the whole thing off on circular waist yarn. And the waist yarn got stuck on some of the needles. I'm closing the cast-off edge with a Kitchener stitch. I'm assembling this on my linker, starting with the hood, with the right side facing me. For the ribbing, I'm catching just the edge of the stitches. Then I'm carefully catching each of the live stitches held onto the waist yarn, being careful not to catch the waist yarn. The stitches don't all fit on the linker, so I'll have to set up the rest later. Now for the scarf part, I'm lining up the center points and then going out from there. I'm being careful not to stretch the scarf or catch any of the waist yarn in this seam. And when I get to the end, I'm making sure all the stitches are pushed all the way back. Then advancing the linker to the start before threading it. Then I'm threading the linker according to the guide in my manual, which is just off camera. And I'm using this long needle threader thingy to get the thingy through the thingy. Now I'm making sure the tail gets caught on the latched needle, which is harder than it should be. And we're linking. I'm trying to keep the waist yarn out of the way as I go. This goes a lot faster than on the machine. Now that I've gotten about halfway, I'm pulling the first half off the linker so I can hang the rest of the stitches. The process for this is the same. I'm removing the yarn marker so it doesn't get stuck in the seam. And more linking. This is a little stiff. I probably need to disassemble it, clean it, and oil it, but that's a job for a different video. At the end, I'm cutting the yarn and pulling the tail through. Then I need to advance the linker so I can get the whole piece off the machine. And there we have what looks like a pretty good seam for a beginner. Now the waist yarn can come off. Here's the final scarf, washed and blocked. This came out much better than the previous iterations. It's still like not quite, like I kind of want it to be form-fitted, but this loose kind of thing works well if you're like in a cold place and you want to like completely wrap yourself up, which is probably what my mom wants. This will probably be her in the winter. So, what have we learned from this project? We have learned that you should listen to me. Well, you should listen to the things that I said in previous videos and not the things that I said in this video, and make swatches and do all of the math beforehand instead of just trying to wing it, because when you wing it, you get this abomination. And if I had taken the time to make a prototype and figure out what I wanted to do and like do all the math beforehand and figure out just how long this curve was going to be with that extra Y shaping in the back, I would not have done this. But when I took the time to make a prototype and fix my pattern, I came up with something that I'm happy with. So, learn from my mistakes and don't do the same thing. I'm going to send this one off to my mom. It should get there before Mother's Day. If not, I'm sorry, Mom. Other than that, let me know what you think. Would you make something like this? Would you wear something like this? And let me know if there are any other, like, accessories that you'd like to see me make. That's it. Thanks for watching. Happy knitting. It's too warm in here for this. My mom lives in a much colder climate. Scarf.